So hi, I'm Celia from the Brandeis Hoot. I'm going to tell you a little bit about an intro of the story. So what happened is after the Kavanaugh hearings, protesters took to the Rap Steps, a public place at Brandeis, with a long history of protest, to basically say that they stand in solidarity with survivors of sexual assault and are against the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing. We sent reporters and photographers to the scene to take photos and to interview people protesting. What ended up happening is many students were upset with us for being there, for photographing them, and for asking for comment. We ended up running photos with faces and running photos and covering the story. But we received a lot of backlash from the student body because people didn't want to be photographed, they didn't want to be quoted, and they didn't want to be covered, even though they were protesting in a public space. Ryan is going to tell you more about it since he was on the ground.
Yeah, so when it comes to covering a community, there's definitely a certain balance with like alienating them versus covering them. And when it comes to public protests on campus, it's surprising sometimes just how, I mean, at our school, we're a liberal university and nobody's calling us the enemy of the people or anything like that. But at the same time, we approached these people, and from the start, they were unwilling to, they had signs that said, like, come talk to us, but wouldn't talk to journalists specifically. And as soon as we tried to take photos, they said, you're not allowed to publish these, which we were. So yeah. It was a complicated issue, and one that we tried to do justice by not alienating. So if we go back to this photo here, you'll notice there's no people in the photo. It's cropped in tight on this single sign. But then on the inside insert, you see the full protest taking place there on the steps and some of the signage. They really didn't want people's faces, and it's a complicated issue because it's about sexual assault and sexual assault on campus. So there probably are survivors among the protesters, even if they're not specifically identifying themselves as survivors in that case. Yeah.
Yeah, so another issue we faced were interests of safety. There were survivors who we knew because we are at Brandeis and it's a small school who we knew were in the crowds. And we, of course, didn't want to endanger anyone in creating this reporting because one of our mandates is do no harm. But our responsibility is also to tell the student body what's happening and to let the student body know why people are protesting and in fact that they were protesting. So another issue happened was when we wrote a follow-up as they continued to protest throughout the story. And we again took photos and again published and again faced backlash from the student body. And it was a really sensitive issue that was a long period of debate in the newsroom with editors-in-chief and myself involved and photographers and writers. And it became a really big deal at our school and not just for our own paper. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Not a whole lot. I guess, are there any questions?
Yeah, questions, comments, concerns? Yeah.
Moving forward, how have you guys addressed this? Because, you know, you are on like a place that's public and you're reporting on this and people think they know the law, but that's not the law.
Absolutely.
Moving forward, how have you guys adapted to your further covering?
So one of the things, I was one of the people that really felt like it was important to publish the photos, just specifically these ones, the kind of common sense photo. This is a protest, wide shot of everyone in it. We didn't do a whole lot of, like, even though they could have been really powerful photos, there were people with duct tapes over their mouth standing really intensely, and you could have singled people out in the photos and got some like really amazing shots, but we decided to stick really to these wide shots where it's not specific on any single person. But when I decided that we should try and I decided to try and convince the editors-in-chief that we needed to move forward and just present the photos like we would any other article. So I went through our ethics guide and just laid it out point by point how this is in line with our ethics guide and why this is important. And there was a lot of debate, a long back and forth. I think it was like 4 or 5 hours that night.
Yeah, it came up on production night and we were discussing it because it was a really important issue. And I'm sure, as you all know, an issue on production night is not an issue you want to be discussing as you try to lay out the paper. But Ryan made some excellent points, and I think we stayed true to the story, because if we hadn't published those photos, the photos everyone was seeing as they walked up those steps to go to class, it would have been inaccurate, and it would have been against our ethics policy. Another issue was communication. We wanted to make sure we maintained a relationship with these students so we could cover them in the future and so they'd be willing to talk to us. And we weren't able to maintain the relationship as well as I would have liked, but we were able to cover them. Yeah.
In the article, did you acknowledge that they didn't want to be, how did you address that?
Oh, I mean, it was very clear. We quoted them. They were shouting at us like, we don't consent to having our photos taken. So that was quoted in the article, yeah.
It ended up becoming a part of the story.
Yeah, they would also say things like, if they came up and told us like, you can't report on us, they said like, don't use our names and stuff like that. But like, it's people we know and like people that are on campus, figures that have been behind other protests before. So we just ran with it. We're like we would any other story. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.